Y'all, and again, thank you so much for joining us. This is our second webinar in our summer series. Our first one was last month on abolition. This one is on lawyering from the inside out, and so it's a deep dive into the amazing work of lawyers, legal advocates, legal workers, and organizers who are doing just incredible work to bridge our family on the inside with the lawyers and legal workers on the outside. And so I think we chose this month to do this webinar in large part because it's Black August, as folks know, which comes out of a long, incredible, and robust history of folks on the inside organizing in ways that really move and challenge the organizations and the organizers on the outside. And so this webinar is really meant for us to talk a bit about that history of Black August, talk a bit about the legacy of political prisoners, the ways in which lawyers have showed up in the past, and also the ways that we need lawyers to show up now. We'll also talk about some of the exciting work that's happening, some examples of folks who are bridging advocacy and policy work in California, from folks who are locked up to folks who are their family members and those folks who are left behind. We also have an incredible panel of folks from across the country. We have Jody Polk, who works with paralegals and legal clerks and jailhouse lawyers and is building a network of folks. And so we're going to do kind of a full exploration, both of what lawyers can do and how they can show up, but also of some of the movement work that's happening on the inside that's often erased or siloed in a way that we're not connected with. And so we hope both to share the work of some dope organizations, but I think also to invite folks in to doing work in a way that honors and builds with and upon the work that's actually presently happening in all jails and prisons across the country. So I'm gonna really briefly introduce the panelists, and I'm gonna talk to them a bit about their work, give us some context. I have a few questions for them, and I wanna open up to y'all to ask any questions you might have or clarifications. So we have 5 incredible panelists. The first one is Lumumba Bandeli, who's with Malcolm X Grassroots and also with LDF. He has worked for decades with both political prisoners and radical movements across the country. We'll talk a bit about and ground us in the history of political prisoners and the ways that movements have and have not shown up for them. We also have Sophia Elijah, who just started Alliance for Families for Justice, which is an incredible organization based out of New York that supports families and folks who are locked up, both to change advocacy and policy, but also to build a community around those families and what folks can do. We have Jody Polk, who just recently got the Soros Fellowship to build out a project of legal clerks and legal jailhouse lawyers to really build their strength and provide resources that they need to do their work on the inside, which is a whole category of lawyers and legal workers that are often, I think, erased or forgotten in networks like this. And so really excited to lift up Jody's dope work and the work that she's doing with folks across the country. We also have Taina Vargas Edmond, who's an amazing organizer out of California, who founded Initiate Justice and is now the ED of that organization. They do incredible work, again, with building the advocacy power of folks on the inside and working with folks, families on the outside, to support advocacy efforts that change material conditions and also change when we talk about justice and things that are happening in our systems, in our prison and jail systems. And lastly, we have Amani Swahili, who is with the National Prison Strike, who's going to talk a bit about what's happening right now across the country and ways we can support. So that is our dope panel. We will record this, or we are recording it so that folks can download this and watch it. We also will post some resources later this week on our website for folks who want to dive deeper into these topics. So I'm going to start really quickly with Lumumba to ground us a bit in the history of political prisoners and Black August and the work that he's done to support those.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Good afternoon for those on the West Coast. So I'm going to move really quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time, but just for the sake of this discussion, just try to talk a little bit about some of the work that I was a part of in the context of a political prisoner campaigns. And so I guess to start, I would say that a lot of what we at the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and the New York Task Force and a number of other collectives have been a part of were really movements, were rather campaigns that come out of historical movements. So many of the political prisoners that we were working with and still work with come out of the era of the Black Power movement, particularly folks who were part of formations like the Panther Party, Young Lords, Revolutionary Action Movement, Republic of New Africa, etc. But those folks who come out of that particular era who share a certain set of experiences, many of whom were targeted by COINTELPRO, if not directly, but their organizations and the movements themselves. And so really what we recognized was we had a responsibility to make sure that these individuals were freed and were released relatively quickly. I don't know what that noise is. I hope it's not me.
You're good, but that's a quick reminder. If you're not on mute, then please go on mute. Silent, but
no problem. And so I'll just talk really quickly about what we did and some significant shifts that happened relatively recently. So most of the work that we had done around political prisoners really was framed around awareness campaigns. And that was significant because many people did not recognize that there existed within the borders of the United States political prisoners. You know, by definition, political prisoners are people who are incarcerated based on their political actions and or beliefs. And so there are many people that fall in that category. But again, we were focusing on a particular population of folks. And that awareness campaign really was by way of forums, public events, public awareness materials, doing brochures, creating posters, really just letting our communities know who these freedom fighters were. At the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, we established with a number of other folks, particularly coming out of Stress Magazine, Students for Jericho, a Black August Hip Hop project where we took rap artists and tried to inform and influence their craft and took them in internationally. And so there was a whole particular kind of project that Black August allowed for us to impact that work. Some of the other work included also supporting families, people whose wives, political prisoners' wives, children, mothers in some cases, really needed support. These are individuals who were snatched from their lives, who now were living in cages. And I think for us, particularly again, the folks in MXG and people who I work closely with, this work took on a different sense of urgency, particularly after the deaths of Bashir Hamid, Murley Africa, and Teddy Jahis. We recognized that there was a new sense of urgency because many of our freedom fighters were dying in prison. So we didn't have the luxury to just really just do awareness campaigns. And so thus we shifted and we recognized that we needed to really explicitly focus on reframing our work as a freedom campaign. And there's a distinct difference, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. But the avenues by which we were focusing on gaining freedom in their release were clemency, and that was medical clemency, medical parole, and other parole. And that really informed how we told the story of who they were and when we told the story. But it forced us to reframe like who they were. So yes, many of these people were and are amazing and superhuman in some cases, freedom fighters who have sacrificed tremendously, but they're also educators, they're artists, they're healers, they're mentors, athletes, parents, grandparents, and just so much more. And so we examined the means by which the state was keeping them in prison and developed strategies to dismantle those means. In some cases, we challenged the interpretation of the law. In other cases, we worked to change the law and how the law was applied. But what this work has revealed for us is that we actually are in need of creative approaches and fresh eyes. This year alone has been somewhat miraculous in that we have witnessed the release of 3 political prisoners. And these are 3 people who all were told separately and individually that they would never be released from prison. We saw the release of Herman Bell. We saw the release of Debbie Africa, and we saw the release of Robert Seth Hayes. And that's just this year alone. 3.5 years ago, we saw the release of Sekou Odinga. Previous to that, we had Marilyn Buck. Previous to that, we had Eddie Conway. So we are actually doing what many people consider to be the impossible. And so what we are now looking to do is increase the number of people that are willing to work on this. Again, we need fresh eyes. We need people who have a creative approach to this work. And as long as we are clear about the need to maintain the objective of this being a freedom campaign, we will be reminded of what the main task and main objectives are. And I'll stop there, and Safia can, I guess, talk about, because she's my elder also.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up question, Lumumba. I guess 2.
Yes.
One is around like the scope. And so how many folks have y'all worked with? Me think about like the kind of how many political prisoners for all liberation movements are still in cages? Kind of what are the thoughts around that number? And then for y'all, kind of when you say creative approaches, would love to hear just a bit more about that. And then Sophia will be the perfect entree into digging people.
Sure. So the actual number, I will refer people to go to the Jericho website, which lists many, many. And I think I don't want to give an answer because I think depending on how people identify that shift, some people identify as political prisoners, some people don't, sometimes some people don't, but the movement identifies them as political prisoners. So it becomes a little, tricky in some cases. And so I would suggest people go to the Jericho website to get that information. And so when we talk about creative approaches, I think more recently what we have focused on in New York was the parole process here. Some years back, we recognized that the reason that many of the New York State political prisoners were being denied parole, even though many of them really fit the criteria for parole release, were being denied based on the nature of the crime. And we know that that is something that will never change. And so we began to develop a strategy to really reshape what the parole process in New York State overall looked like. And that was in need, not just because of the political prisoners who were being denied, but other social prisoners who were being denied. So it was a flawed process. And so we supported a number of other strategies who targeted the governor's office to make sure that parole commissioners who were not utilizing the criteria effectively were replaced with people who would. And really force the governor to sort of reimagine or, in fact, I guess, be more clear with what the criteria for parole was. And so these new policies were put in place, and thus we have been able to see the results by way of some of these political prisoners in New York coming out. And so we can talk a little bit more about what the blowback has since been, but how we continue to utilize, again, some of these creative strategies to get.
Thank you so much, Lumumba. So I'm going to go to Sophia with the Alliance for Families for Justice to talk a bit about your work, Sophia, with political prisoners, and any more grounding you want to provide about what we mean when we say that term, and also like the obstacles and challenges as a lawyer and litigator that you found in defending.
First, thank you. It's great to be here. And it's really cool to follow Lumumba, who I consider to be my co-conspirator here in New York. So I've been working around political prisoners my entire career. It's actually why I became a lawyer. And I think that the work is really broad. There's so many different roles for lawyers, particularly Black lawyers, to play in this work. A few decades ago, there were virtually no Black lawyers who were working in this field, and that made it very challenging. One, for the political prisoners and their families, because they wanted to see Black faces, people from their community, people from their lived experience, whom they could rely on and could trust. And it's taken literally decades to start to cultivate a small cadre, far too small cadre of Black lawyers. But I'm going to talk about some of the different ways that lawyers have been involved in it, that I've been involved in particular. And I guess I should start from a point of the importance of building solidarity with other liberation movements. Lumumba mentioned the Black liberation movement certainly was central to a lot of the work and still is, but Puerto Rican independence movement is as well, the North American anti-imperialist movement, and the Native American independence movement. Those four movements all are very key, and during the 80s in particular, in the early 80s here in New York, there were dozens and dozens of people arrested and charged with conspiracy, RICO conspiracy cases, who represented those various movements. And the role of Black lawyers who were focused on, in particular, the interests of members of the Black liberation movement, working in solidarity with those other movements was very important so that their interests and their legal positions weren't lost. So that included participating in people's tribunals around these issues, and one of the first was back in 1990, held at Hunter College, where all those different movements had representatives giving testimonials, and we had jurists, international jurists from around the world to participate, so that the plight and the reality not only of the people who were incarcerated, but the movements that they represented were presented in a collective fashion, and documents were reported out from that, and actually a verdict was reached by those international jurors that was presented to the United Nations. That was very important work, and certainly the role of lawyers in that was essential. Certainly there's the issue of representing people at trial. The reality right now is that most of our political prisoners, they're past the trial stage. They're in the post-conviction parole stage. They're past the appeal stage because they've been incarcerated for decades. I've been involved at the trial level for Marilyn Buck, as Lumumba mentioned, on the post-conviction level for Marilyn and for Sundiata Acoli, and helped in a number of different ways with the Ohio 7, the San Francisco 8, etc. It is also important that lawyers play a role in guiding the narrative. And by that, I mean several things. One, obviously, the political position is guided by the people inside, who are the freedom fighters. How that position gets presented on the outside such that legal consequences from that narrative don't come back to haunt the individual when they're trying to come up for parole or clemency. It's important for lawyers to play that role and to guide their clients as to what is helpful and what could be problematic in the future, because that's part of our responsibility, not only to our freedom fighters, but to our community as a whole. The goal isn't to find more ways for people to stay in cages. The goal is to use our craft and our skills to bring about liberation. I would say that the next role is for our voices and our lens to be the historical context for our movements. Far too often we look up and we find people who don't look like us writing the history of our freedom fighters. And so the lens for where they fit into the liberation of Black people can be distorted unintentionally by people who have not lived through and are not part of and not going to benefit from the liberation of Black people. So I think that's another important role for Black lawyers to play. And also it's important for us to play the role of broadening the narrative. Lumumba mentioned the work in New York around parole. Back around 2011 or 12, around there, we started talking about various ways to take on the issues that were keeping our freedom fighters inside without trying to kind of beat the drum about the existence of political prisoners, because that was working against us. And so focusing on the issue of people aging in prison was a very significant one that allowed us to broaden the narrative and to bring on far more people across the state who would be interested in this issue, because one, the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision had a budget problem because it was costing them more money to provide for the medical care of people aging in prison, and far more people were aging in prison than just our political prisoners. So it helped to open up that narrative and create more space to get support and, in fact, get more people out, so that the rate of release for people who are older in prison has actually increased considerably in New York just over the past 2.5 years. It's also important for us to play, I would say, a protective role, to stay vigilant and keep our ear to the ground about attacks on our movement. And when I say attacks on our movement, I'm not just talking about, say, white, but also what is the FBI up to 24/7, 365 as far as finding ways to continue to criminalize movements for liberation. And I'm sure we see that with the Black Lives Matter movement and other similar movements, but there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from how those attacks came down on the Black Liberation Movement, the Puerto Rican Independence Movement, and the other movements that I mentioned. And I think it's incumbent upon lawyers to look at the legal, the misuse of the legal system to attack our movements so that we can protect movements that are viable now and those that will come in the future. And I guess the last thing that I'll say, because I'm probably talk way over my time, is the importance of building relationships so that we have a strong inside game and outside game. Lawyers have a unique ability to build relationships with government officials, which sometimes as an activist we might not think we want to do. We may not want to quote unquote, get our hands dirty in politics and in elections and policymakers, et cetera. But it's important, that's a role that lawyers can play, and it's a very important role because we can keep these issues on the forefront of the minds of elected officials and policymakers and get assigned to task force just because we're lawyers. And there's still this mystique that we have this amazing intelligence that could be beneficial, and it's important for us to use that access to support our people, to get them out and to push the agendas that will ultimately result in our liberation. I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, always, Sophia, for just all of the walk in love, but also the brilliance and clarity. So I think we're going to return to this conversation for folks who have questions around political prisoners specifically. We also wanted to widen the conversation, talk a bit about political prisoners, but also about the ways in which we do and don't show up for our folks who are locked up, perhaps for not political reasons. So I want to also pass it now to Taina, who is an incredible organizer out of California, talk a bit about Initiate Justice and your incredible work there, and also how you have worked to really bridge movements that are happening on the inside to build power and to make changes with advocacy efforts on the outside.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marbury, for the invitation. I feel super excited and honored to be part of this super dope panel of folks across the country doing really incredible work. So thank you. My name is Taina. I'm the founder and executive director of Initiate Justice. We're a fairly new organization founded in September of 2016 by myself and my partner, Richard, who was incarcerated for about 7 years. And the reason that we came up with the idea for Initiate Justice because my experience was I had worked in state government for a little while. I had worked on state policy. I had worked in the nonprofit sector where I was, working on state policy and prison reform policy in particular. And my experience was I was, doing this Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, had a very in-depth knowledge about various policies that were coming down the pipeline that could help my husband and folks like him get time off of their sentences and come home sooner. But then my experience Saturday and Sunday when I'm visiting my husband and talking to incarcerated people, talking to their loved ones who are visiting them, and I recognized that there was a very serious disconnect. Folks who were on the inside didn't know about most of the organizations on the outside who were helping them. They didn't know about policies that could help them get time off of their sentence, could help them get enhancements removed. And then there's also the issue of the rumor mill that spins inside of prison. So also a lot of things that were going around that were just not true. So we started doing just unofficial organizing work when there was an initiative that was going to get on the ballot in 2016 called Prop 57. For folks who are not in California, Prop 57 did a lot of things. Among them was give about 96% of the prison population the opportunity to earn time off of their sentence by completing educational and rehabilitative programs. And while that proposition was, when folks were collecting signatures, when it actually got on the ballot, a lot of folks didn't know about it. Their family members didn't know about it. So my husband and I just started hustling and collecting signatures in the visiting room. Didn't get kicked out until about 6 weeks when they realized what we were up to. And then, hustled to get people to encourage their loved ones on the outside to register to vote and to vote yes on it. But then after Proposition 57 passed, a lot of the organizations who had been working on it weren't really working as hard on the implementation. And that was really when the work with the Initiate Justice kicked off because, now we had all these folks who we'd been telling, okay, we need to hustle and make sure that we get this initiative passed. And now folks are like, how does this affect me? How much time am I going to get off for this? So what we did was we created a survey and we asked incarcerated people how they thought Prop 57 should be implemented. We got about 2,000 survey results, and from those results developed 5 core demands that we took to the administrative level at the California Department of Corrections, to the legislative level, budget oversight level, and eventually after about a year of organizing, the Department of Corrections received about 41,000 comments, and almost all of them were echoing the demands that we had helped reform as a result of asking folks inside how they thought it should be implemented. So the work that we did around Prop 57 like really helped create the structure of how we are as an organization today. So essentially our work at Initiate Justice is two-pronged. Like one, it's education. So we have about 4,300 incarcerated people who are on our mailing list who get quarterly newsletters from us. And the newsletters have information on pretty much any policy reform that could potentially impact people who are currently inside. So if there's anything moving through the legislature to help get rid of sentencing enhancements, to help increase time that people can earn off of their sentences, to allow for early parole consideration for certain groups of people, we make sure that folks know about it and also know that they can be involved, that they can write a letter to their assembly member or their senator, that they can donate to Initiate Justice to help us get the word out to other folks. They can get their family members on the outside involved to really help folks know that they are a part of this work. All of these policies are centered around them. So what they think should be not only taken into consideration, but they should be leading the work. And those of us on the outside should be guided by them. And then the second part of our work is the advocacy. So in addition to our 4,300 members, we also have about 175 inside organizers who we train up to actually lead Initiate Justice advocacy campaigns from the inside. So folks receive a toolkit from us where they learn just kind of like the background, like what organizing is, some of our philosophical background, our politic, making sure that everything that we do is intersectional. So we're not throwing like certain groups of people under the bus when we're saying that we want liberation for some, like we're an anti-patriarchal, anti-homophobic, anti-capitalist organization, and just making sure that all of that is very clear in everything that we do. So our inside organizers also help us recruit new members and continue to build the power from inside. Our inside organizers also help us to frame what our policy moves are moving forward. So last year we had reached out to several of our inside organizing teams, and one of them had suggested to us that we lead a campaign to restore voting rights to people who are incarcerated and on parole in California. California is ahead of a lot of states in the sense that you only lose your voting rights if you're in state prison or on state parole. You can vote if you're in county jails or on county probation, but it's still about 162,000 people who can't vote simply because of a felony conviction. So from that, we started leading a campaign. We filed our own ballot initiative and collected about 25,000 signatures to try and get something on the ballot this year to restore voting rights for folks impacted by incarceration. We didn't end up winning that one, but now there's a bill that's moving through the legislature that would do the same thing, but it would only be for folks that would be so that's like the campaign that we're working on now, and our folks on the inside are helping to lead that. We're also in the process of doing another survey where we are asking, among other things, like if you could vote. So we're working on like a first of its kind of report where we actually want to like paint a picture of like what the political landscape would be like in California if incarcerated people actually had their voting rights restored. So analyzing things from like demographics, like political party, age, race, gender, all of those things. Also thinking of like where people would register to vote, because in California you can essentially choose where you want to register. So if we restored voting rights to folks who are incarcerated, they could decide to register at their last residence address or the prison where they're currently housed. And like I imagine this is the case in most places. Most of the prisons are in rural, out of the way, very conservative places. So how would we change local political systems if we re-enfranchise these folks? But also want to show like what issue areas are important to incarcerated people to kind of just like dispel a lot of the myths that folks who are incarcerated don't care about social issues the same way that voters on the outside do. So that's something that we're working on right now and continuing to like build our base of people inside, to continue to build that political power, and also to just like encourage like other folks in other organizations to make sure that any like political organizing, any advocacy work that you're doing, that you are taking leadership from folks who are inside. So now my husband just came home from prison about a month ago. He came home about 2 years early, thanks to Proposition 57, that bill that we worked so hard to get passed. And we also like share our personal story to like hopefully inspire folks, so the folks can see like what happens when you trust folks who are impacted, when you take leadership from people who are inside, and like do the extra work that it takes to get folks inside engaged, and then, you know, engage in the important policy work, because at the end of the day, like, had this policy not passed, my husband would still be incarcerated. So really just doing the sometimes hard work to shift the narrative and help folks see like how important being politically engaged is in the abolitionist movement.
Yes, thank you so much, Taina. I'm always just so inspired and moved when you share the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. I'm gonna pass it now. We're gonna have time at the end for questions. So if you are like bubbling with questions, then either put them in the chat box for us. Under, I think at the very bottom of your screen, there's a chat box function. You can just put in any questions you have. We also will open it up at the end for questions. But I'm going to pass it now to Jody Polk, who's building a network of formerly incarcerated legal workers, lawyers, and law clerks. And Jody's going to talk to us a bit about the work that she's doing and why she's doing it, and also ways that folks can support and some of the challenges in that. Go ahead, Jody. Oh, you're on mute. There you go. It's bottom left-hand side. Still on mute. There we go. We good. Go ahead.
Awesome. So my name is Jody Polk. I'm in Gainesville, Florida. I'm the executive director for the Florida Council for Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And I have the honor of being chosen this year as a 2018 Soros Justice Fellow. And so my work is around incarcerated law clerks in the law libraries within prisons throughout the United States. This work is extremely important to me because while I was incarcerated in a Florida state prison, I was recruited, trained, and served my time as was considered an inmate law clerk. And so as my time as a law clerk trying to help individuals who were incarcerated around their legal needs, I just noticed how our training did not equip us for the realities of the work that we were doing, as well as there were no type of continuing education, and we had absolutely no support. And the work that we were doing is extremely important. For incarcerated individuals, you have a constitutional right to have access to the court, and prisons provide this access by having law libraries with trained individuals who are law clerks who are supposed to help in the preparation, interpretation of case law, and working on cases. And so one of the things that I also realized since my release is that individuals just believe that law clerks, if we even knew they existed at all, only support incarcerated individuals as trying to get out of jail or trying to get out of prison. When the truth is, we handled so much, from civil, family, individuals receiving divorces while they were inside, individuals losing their children while they're inside, losing licenses, the need to help individuals around disciplinary issues and things that were actually happening within the institution, as well as other civil and criminal issues. And one of the things also that was so important to me around the law library and the law clerk was that's the place that you went to when you first got, to prison. Everyone spent some portion of their time inside of the law library. Law clerks are some of the few individuals, including staff, that actually has an access to the complete institution. So that's going to be with individuals who are confined, individuals who are in the infirmary, youthful offenders, as well as death row and general population. So if you would just imagine these individuals being able, the need to serve the entire institution and the ability to change the culture of the institution, this project to me was just more than needed, because these individuals are typically left out. And so the work that I'm actually doing through the project is 3 prongs, looking at the training of how we train a certified law clerk. If we're going to give this individual a title as a certified law clerk, what type of certifications are they using, and how is that certification in line with the various needs that the incarcerated population will need from their law clerks, especially when we have so much talk about the illiteracy inside of the institution. When an individual comes to the law library and need assistance, them not being able to understand, maybe read or write, is not an excuse for them to be able to receive legal work. So that puts a great bit of responsibility on the law clerk. So making sure that training was sufficient. Also, continuing education courses. Inside of incarceration, there's rarely any programming for individuals who are serving extended and life sentences. 95% of your incarcerated law clerks are serving extended, if not life sentences. So to train someone with less than a year worth of training and then expect them to stay in that capacity with our laws and constitution and policy changing yearly is just ridiculous. So looking at continuing education courses for law clerks. And then in the third prong, the need to build an advocacy network. We need specifically lawyers, law schools, community organizers to be able to enforce this right of access to the court. Lawyers and organizers to actually be a part of the training, going in and providing those continuing education and having that firsthand access and that one-on-one type of relationship with our legal professionals who are in the inside, being able to prepare them. This is also an opportunity for preparing individuals for employment in legal services, as well as being able to provide needs around civil litigation inside of our communities after release, as well as hopefully being able to look at the law clerk program to be an equivalent to like an associate's degree or paralegal training on the outside. For me, after my release as a law clerk that I served in that position for 5 years, to come home and then go through a 2-year education to get an associate's degree when a lot of my work was hands-on experience within the actual institution. How can we work to be able to not provide streamlines, but better opportunities for incarcerated law clerks to be able to join into the legal world on the outside after incarceration? Because the skills, the resources, the information, the lens, and just the closeness that we have to the issues are just so much needed. So connecting prisons to law schools, to community organizations, to law offices who may be willing to give chances to law clerks after incarceration, as well as I heard the brother said earlier, you know, advocating for these individuals. Once I came home, the reputation of a certified law clerk and providing services and legal needs in the inside was wiped away on the outside. It's time for us to get to know incarcerated law clerks and value the amazing work that we do on the outside. Legal research and writing, preparing case laws, everything, challenging, interpreting the case law. These skills are universal. These skills are not just important. I came out with me. I'm currently fighting to get into law school. That doesn't make me a lawyer. You know, my experience, my passion, my desire to be a lawyer makes me a lawyer. And to not deny someone with the experience and the passion and the skills to be able to make impact not on the inside, but on the outside as well is an injustice. So also donating time, you know, going in, providing some training, some information, as well as materials. Our law libraries on the inside are very bare of the resources, primary, secondary resources that we need, updated materials, the trainings that I hear that we provide, the organizations, the toolkits that we provide on the outside. We need to be able to provide this information, these tools, and these resources to our law clerks and our jailhouse lawyers on the inside as well. So I think, you know, through equipping them and empowering them with the tools that they need to not just answer a survey or to be a part of this movement, but to, like Tiana said, to lead the movement. These individuals, if equipped with some resources, with some attention, and with more awareness around who they are and what they're doing on the inside, it could literally, you know, change our criminal justice system from the inside out.
Yes, there were like snaps happening. Thank you so much. That was really powerful and I think really important. I'm excited to revisit ways that folks can support directly who are on this call. I also wanted to say thank you, Emmanuel, and shout out to Harvard Bossa, which stays popping and doing dope things. We will get to your question. I think the next panelists will address some of them and then we'll come back to them as well. But thank y'all for lighting up the chat box and keep it coming. We'll return to these. So last we have Amani, who's going to talk a bit about the current national prison strike that's going on, how folks can support, some of the context around that, and how it ties in, I think, to this long history of figuring out ways that we can more actively and consistently support our folks who are locked up. So I'm going to pass it to you.
My name is Amani Sawari, and I am the founder of sawarime.org and the spokeswoman for the National Prison Strike. Jailhouse lawyers did call the strike. They reached out to me on Twitter and asked if they could host a strike on my website, which is how I got involved in speaking on their behalf on the outside and organizing on the outside for the National Prison Strike. So the National Prison Strike is going on right now. It started on August 21st and it's going until September 9th. Prisoners have come out with 10 demands, which you can find on, and you guys probably already know a lot of all this, but it's happening right now. And the 10 demands range from an end to prison slavery, rescinding Prisoner Litigation Reform Act, end of truth and sentencing laws, interracial overcharging and gang enhancements. It really encompasses a lot of the things that we're all fighting for in all the different regions of the country. And prisoners are boycotting in one of 4 ways. The first way is through work stoppages. So they're refusing to go into their work assignments, which does cause a loss of privileges and changes in their prisoner status in a lot of prisons. So they do need legal help in that area. If prisoners do not have work assignments, they may not have the privilege to have a job, and they can participate by being in sit-ins, which is just all of them sitting in a common area and refusing to move. Some prisoners do not have access to being a part of general population, so they can participate through boycotting, refusing to spend money on commissary items, hygiene products, talking on the phone. A lot of prisoners are refusing to talk on the phone using like GTL's phones and things like that right now. And then if prisoners do not have access to boycotting because they don't have access to spending money in commissary and things like that, the final way that they can participate is through hunger strikes. And we've seen prisoners uploading hunger strike videos and things like that on social media. So today actually marks 1 week into the strike. The strike is 2.5 weeks long, and we've just gotten through like 1/3 of it. So we've gotten some reports back from a lot of different institutions. And I'll read those off right now. So in Washington, we've got over 200 immigrant detainees at the Northwest Center that have declared a hunger strike. We've also got, and these have all come into JLS, and so this is the report back from jailhouse lawyers. Prisoners in the Georgia State Prison have reported their strike. In South Carolina, we've got prisoners striking in Broad River Correctional Institution, Lee Correctional Institution, McCormick Correctional Institution, Turfville Correctional Institute, Kershaw Correctional Institution, and Librarian Correctional Institution. These are all work strikes and commissary boycotts. In North Carolina, we've got prisoners in Hyde Correctional Institution demonstrating. In California, we've got prisoners at New Folsom Prison hunger striking. In Ohio, we've got Toledo Correctional Institution. They're hunger striking there. David Easley and James Ward have been moved into isolation for participating into the strike. They were 2 of the first prisoners to initiate in their prison. In Colorado, starting around August 7th, we had prisoners in Sterling Correctional Facility announce their hunger strike. In Indiana, we've also got Wabash Valley Correctional Institution hunger striking. New Mexico, Lee County Correctional Facility, we've got hunger strikes there. In Florida, we've also got 40 prisoners refusing to work in Charlotte Correctional Institution and 100 boycotting commissary. In Dade Correctional, there are about 40 prisoners on strike there. There are 60 prisoners on strike in Franklin Correctional Facility, and in Holmes Correctional Facility, there are about 70 prisoners on strike. I've got 2 more areas for you guys. In Texas, we've also got prisoners striking hunger strikes. A lot of those prisoners have been moved to segregation due to their striking in Texas. And then in Nova Scotia, Canada, we've also had in Halifax prisoners hunger striking, and they've also released a statement. In Palestine, we've also had prisoners release a statement of solidarity. So this has stretched widely, and for each one of these reports, we know that there are several that are going unreported right now. These are prisoners who do have access to sending their report in through snail mail or through their own lines of communication. And so we're really excited to see that this is taken off. Definitely the mainstream media has been much more present this year than they have been in past years. So I think that the work that we've been doing for decades is changing the narrative of prisoners' rights and the rights that prisoners have to strike and to demonstrate on behalf of getting better conditions. People are starting to see that prisoners should be taking the lead in changing their own conditions and having ownership over making those changes. So demand number 10, the right to vote, is also a demand that prisoners are calling for, and people are starting to see that is something that's valid. So that's just a report back from the National Prison Strike so far. I definitely encourage everyone to stay tuned because it's exciting.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that and for your work in helping hold that down. I think there's a question that maybe you can answer now from Emmanuel around how folks can support. And so they suggested some ideas. I think that the Boston students at Harvard are thinking of. I'm not sure if you can see in the chat box. But they suggested about building awareness by writing a letter for students to sign on to in support of the strike, inviting speakers, action on campus on Labor Day for incarcerated folks not getting paid for their labor, and demands for improved clinical legal studies options for folks wanting to work with incarcerated folks in this movement. I don't know if you or any of the other panelists have thoughts on those or specific ways that folks are asking for support.
I definitely think that those are all great ideas. In every single region, we want to see people stepping up and going to solidarity events or showing solidarity in some way. There have also been ideas of writing letters to officials that target each of the demands. So that's another idea. But I really think that everything, like anything that you can think of and everything, because we're turning people's lights on right now that have absolutely no idea what the problem is. And so the farther that we cast that net, the more that we can catch. So I'm up for all of these ideas, and these are great.
Thank you so much. So we are going to ask a few questions of the panelists, but if you also have questions, please do use the chat box. There also Ashley from Oregon talked a bit about a group of folks going to Oregon State Prison and giving legal clinics, working through groups and bringing in law students to assist with that. And so we'd love to hear more about that, Ashley, as well. So the first question I wanted to ask all of y'all was kind of the ways in which there are best practices. Like, what are things that lawyers, legal workers, folks who are have expertise in the law have and can do and do it well? And so what are some kind of best practices that you've seen around legal workers supporting movements on the inside and political prisoners? I can call on folks if you want. Go ahead.
Yes.
There you go.
You know, I really want to jump in on this one. I think one of the most important things that lawyers can do is to be ultra prepared. There's no room for lazy lawyering in this work. Lazy lawyering guarantees defeat, and our people deserve victory. And if we're not going to be the most diligent, hardworking, workaholic lawyers that we can possibly be, then we shouldn't be in this work. Because there's not enough of us in the first place, so we don't get to really spread the work around a lot. So we have to be super, super, super prepared. And I just wanted to also jump in on the question from the Harvard law students, since I'm going up there in a couple of weeks to teach, that it's really important to take clinical education. either a criminal defense clinic, and I know at Harvard there's Prisoners Legal Assistance Project, PLAP, and it's important for students to get that grounding because when you're working with people who are incarcerated, knowing the system as it's set up is important if you're going to be able to help navigate strategies. That's
hashtag no lazy lawyering. I like that. Thank you, Sophia. Paloma, were you going to also comment in about either the Harvard students, Manuel's question, or around this kind of what are some of the best practices you've seen?
Yeah, so I was going to do two things. One, pivot directly to Sophia, but second, to say that we do have a need quite often for legal research. And I know for students, I mean, considering the capacity, of course, of being a student, but with time that you have, that kind of contribution is significant as well.
Just a quick plug, Law for Black Lives has a dope clinical cohort program where we work with clinics and students at universities. And so if you are a student who wants to be doing research for folks who are locked up, for political prisoners around these issues, please hit us up. We can help set up and support that work and hopefully get you some credit and also do some editing for folks. So please let us know. Info at Law for Black Lives. Dope. Other folks, Jody, Taina, Amani, around the question of kind of best practices. I think there's also a chance to share some worst practices. Like, have you seen lawyers or legal workers show up in ways where you're like, this is unhelpful, unproductive? And so kind of thinking both about best and worst practices. You're on mute again, lower left.
So for me, and I'm learning as I'm doing my research that, North and South is completely different. I do live in Florida. But I think the worst practice would just to assume that the criminal justice system ends after a person is sentenced. As someone who was a certified law clerk, we just feel isolated, cut off, removed, and ignored. And that was the downside for the law clerk program and law clerks to be such an amazing opportunity to transform how we do incarceration when there's not any tools, when there's not any resources, when there's not any awareness. It leaves individuals, broken. The individuals who we depend on to do this work and they don't have any support, it just really hardened, a lot of law clerks. And, it just really then started to break down our law library, which was our justice system within the institution. And that just, would impact incarcerated individuals. And then that downward and like our morale and our hope, would kind of transform how staff and corrections officers, would treat us. So the worst practice, I think, is to not acknowledge that these legal professionals are incarcerated and that they're doing amazing work. I was just recently in Angola, and those law clerks, some of them had 50 caseloads, 50 cases on their caseload at that given time. And for someone who is now on the outside, we see so much there's not enough laborers in the movement. There's not enough laborers in the movement. These individuals are on standby, and if equipped with some basic resources, attention, and, some time, they could be some of our greatest allies, not just being in the movement, but actually leading the movement from the inside out. So engage. There's a prison in every state. Get to know those individuals. Understand what the needs are. Each law library, each state is different. Understanding what those needs are and equipping them with the resources to be able to do the work that they need. So for me, that would be, the biggest one. First, acknowledging and being aware that these individuals are there, that they're capable of doing the work, and if empowered and engaged, it could be our biggest leaders inside of this movement to inspire change.
Ashay, thank you for that, Jody. Amani and Taina, do y'all want to comment on that one or the next question?
I think
Dope. So the next question is around what can lawyers and legal workers do. So our network's made up both of organizers, but of a lot of legal workers, from paralegals to law clerks to former jailhouse lawyers. as well as lawyers and law students. So just curious, what is it for each of y'all in the work that you do that would be really helpful for the folks on this call, the law students or lawyers or legal workers, to do to support?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, Initiate Justice, we're like a policy advocacy organization. We're not actually like a legal services organization. So I think because we do so much work that actually has to do with changing the laws, a lot of our members assume that we are lawyers and can, take up their individual cases and help them. And that's not a service that we are able to provide. So what we do is we'll send them like a legal resources guide with a list of like legal organizations that they can reach out to. But a lot of times, these organizations have already got like really broad caseloads, and then they have like a very small window of like types of cases and support they actually provide. We have folks reaching out to us who need help getting access to their medical care. We have folks who need support in writing their own writs, or in situations where they are innocent and need help. And something that we come up against organizationally is even when we get a piece of policy passed, implementation is always an issue. So, even if we have the best policy in place, it doesn't mean that the prisons are actually implementing them the way that they're supposed to on the ground. And in those moments is when it would help to have the support of lawyers so that we can pursue legal action if we need to. In working and like creating like policies, I've been writing the policies that we've been doing, and I am not a lawyer. So there are so many ways that folks who do have law degrees can help us. Even something as simple as lending your support so that we can send our mail through legal mail. Because like unsurprisingly, when we're trying to organize folks on the inside, the prisons sometimes have been confiscating their mail wrongfully because we're not sending anything that we're not supposed to send, but they're trying to stop the work from happening. And that's a really simple way that folks with law degrees can help us to facilitate our mail and get information on the inside without it being read or confiscated by the correctional officers.
Thank you. That was super helpful. Jody, Lumumba, Sophia, Amani, any of y'all have thoughts around how lawyers and legal workers can show up?
I have several. I really feel like I need to respond to the last idea, though, about lawyers using their legal mail access to send in non-legal mail. If you get busted doing that, you can start to burn your license. So that I would caution people to be really careful about doing that. Okay, it could be really problematic. Other ways that lawyers can show up, I think one of the things that might seem really simple is going to visit. When someone gets thrown in the hole, their access to being able to have visits from family members and non-lawyers is severely restricted, but they can't restrict their access to lawyers. And lawyers getting on a plane or taking a long drive to go visit is really, really significant. And the kind of retaliation that people face inside when they decide that they are going to get involved in organizing is horrific and sometimes actually costs people their lives. But being able to have access to lawyers who will go in, one, sends a message to the administration of that prison that legal eyes are paying attention, and lawyers are the only ones who can get access to someone who's thrown in the hole quickly. So that's one of the things that lawyers can do. And lawyers obviously may not have the resources to be able to travel all over, but if they build relationships with junior lawyers or law students, they may be able to deputize some people as their paralegals, people who are formerly incarcerated, who are former law clerks, or have that expertise similarly, could serve that role, and you could broaden the capacity to be able to get access to people quickly.
Okay. Lumumba or Jody or Amani?
I love something that Sophia was saying earlier about changing the narrative. Going out and making a presence, reach out to a local prison that's next to you and inquire about the law library, even visiting those individuals. I have a number of attorneys here in Florida who have reached out to me and pledged time for like some quarterly continuing education courses. These Typically, lawyers don't have a hard time with being able to get inside of the institution, to be able to go in, talk with individuals. And if legal research and writing is your thing and you love it, go in, quarterly and spend 2 hours teaching individuals about legal research and writing, talking about new policies, with the amount of lawyers that we have and the variety of lawyers that we have. What is a subject within your professional career that means a lot to you, that you want to share and you want to spread? Like Sophia was saying, deputizing law students, deputize these law clerks, in a way it may not be official, but go in, spend time with those individuals and share the knowledge and the information that you have. I also saw one of the questions in the comments about the law librarian. The law librarian in an institution is typically an outside civilian person. So it's someone who does not have any type of legal background, any type of possibly like management background. It's just an outside, it's not even an officer who just comes in and sits in that space so that we can have access to that space. So just having an awareness, even reaching out to me if this is something that you're interested in. I would love to share information around some of the needs in the prisons that may be close to you from the correspondence that we have with the certified law clerks who are actually working in that institution, and being able to, partner with them to make sure what they have, but as well as donating legal resources to the law library, periodicals, information. It's to the point, especially down south, we can't get anything in, even if it's not radical, even if it's just information around the organizing that we're doing to restore voting rights in Florida with our legislation and governor changing. This is just basic common information that you could access online or anywhere, but we cannot get this information in. So as an attorney, if you have legal resources, materials, or access to individuals who can provide that, reaching out to the law library or reaching out to that institution in your area, definitely reach out to me if I can do the work for you to see how we can get more resources into the individuals who are on the inside. And more than anything, change the narrative. We're not just some jailhouse lawyers who are in the inside doing frivolous, work. If we are putting up a lot of frivolous work, it's because we don't have the information and the tools and the skills that we need. So understanding that these are serious positions, these are individuals who are doing serious criminal and civil work, and supporting them and treating them as who they are and not a mistake or an incident that may have landed them inside of the institution, but recognizing them as the access to the justice, to the legal system for hundreds of thousands of individuals across the United States.
Thank you for that, Jody. Lumwa, did you have yourself unmute to make a comment?
Yeah, just really quickly, I'd say that, for the political prisoners, a lot of the needs are very specific. But there's some basic things also. Sometimes we may not have enough people who have the ability to just file some documents, who may be able to just read over briefs. I think those things are basic, but if we had a pool of folks who were prepared to whatever kind of expertise they had, we could find ways to utilize that. So we are turning away no lawyers, no legal experts or law students. So, if we had a pool of folks that were willing to do that, believe me, you will not be without any kind of work.
Yes, we'll make that happen.
So one other thing. So many law students have access to Westlaw and Lexis, which a lot of private practitioners can't afford. And so just using that access to do quick legal research would make a huge difference to help people inside.
So I'm actually going to go to one of the questions, which is, I think, for you, Jody, around, and maybe also actually Amani and Tahina, around how far do you push, say, the law librarian or the administrator above that person when they deny folks access or seriously restrict access?
So for me, the advocacy network that I am constructing in the project will be used for that, because on the inside, there's only so far that we can go. When the individuals who are handing down the incident, or accusing you of an incident, is the same person who is accountable for sentencing you, judging you, there is no support. The law librarian is a mutual, an outside civilian who does not have skill or even have the authority to be able to challenge the institution. While I was incarcerated, I can honestly say law librarians saw a lot, but because they had no authority, no training, no skill, the only thing they could kind of say was, I know it's bad. So having some accountability, some push from the outside will go a long, long, long way. And there's no reason that incarcerated law clerks should not have that access to lawyers on the outside, as long as it's within the realms and the duties that we have. But I believe one of the biggest issues is that we forget that this is a constitutional right. And I understand that not for just staff, but one of the things that I saw was just the lack of understanding of that amongst the incarcerated population as well. And so when you believe there's no authority, there's no accountability, there's no oversight, that really goes into, just your passion and your push to fight. And that's what I love even now with the prisoner strike is that push to say, we deserve better, we want better, and we're going to stand in the gap until that happens. So the push definitely needs to come more from outside, because within the culture it's just kind of, dense and dark, and there's not a lot of support that has authority and accountability around the law library at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. And Taina and Amani, I'd be super interested for y'all as well, as you've seen folks organizing on the inside, what kind of blowback there's been, and what are ways that people can help put tact to this so that's possible, folks, from that blowback.
Yeah, so there definitely has been several cases of retaliation from prison officials onto prisoners who are organizing, and that ranges from lockdowns to being thrown in solitary, to in some prisons they're chaining prisoners to the benches. In other prisons there was prisoners who were forced, I think this was in South Carolina, to walk around a pole stripped naked, being searched. And in response to that, there were phone zaps. But I think one really good strategy, and what a phone zap is, when a lot of people just call into a prison and just shut down the phone lines inquiring about what's going on, so that the administrators know that people on the outside are well aware of what's going on and they need to stop right now. But one strategy that I thought of was developing teams for groups of prisoners that are suffering from retaliation. So in certain regions, you see the same tactics being used to oppress prisoners or repress their voice or intimidate them. So if something is happening widespread in Texas or in South Carolina or in any region, then a group of lawyers can work together to sort of protect that group. And then it kind of takes the burden off of working on all these different individuals, but then regions can be assigned to, okay, we're going to target these pole strip searches, or we're going to target this bench chaining thing that's happening right now, and we're going to make sure that we research that and look into that and file whatever documents need to be had in order to support the prisoners that are suffering from that in that moment. And that can be really effective. Like, it can change things within that day, because they're doing this in the dark and they think that no one knows what's going on the outside. And as soon as we find out, an immediate response, whether that be through public pressure or legal pressure. Legal pressure is definitely more powerful than public pressure and can be more effective. So.
Yeah, and a strategy that we have used as well has been like legislative pressure. So we've been encouraging people, if they're having some kind of issue with retaliation, to contact their loved ones on the outside and have them contact their state representatives, their state senator and their state assembly member, because in addition to them doing their legislative work, they're also supposed to do casework and constituent services. So what they'll do is they will actually contact the Department of Corrections on the incarcerated person's behalf. So, and we have found that to be really effective, because the Department of Corrections doesn't like to know that the legislature is being made aware of the actions that they're taking to retaliate against folks. So that has something that has worked really well in our favor.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Taina. So the other question I just want to ask, oh, go ahead. Yep.
I was really going to give a shout out. That's really, really effective what Taini was just saying. We just finished a 3-day retreat where we were training people specifically to regularly go to the district offices of the state, senate, and assembly people so that they can keep these issues on their radar screen. Because I don't know about in other states, but here in New York, the senators and assembly people can go visit any prison anytime unannounced. And that has a tremendous impact. And the other important role that lawyers can play with respect to particular elected officials from our communities, most of them do not have any legal background, nor do they have anybody working on their staff that has legal background. So just the fact that you have legal background, even if you volunteer to help them draft legislation and to dissect proposed legislation and to keep their ear to the ground about what's happening in the prisons is a tremendous service that can be done.
Thank you for that. The other question from HZ was, what differences do you see in the treatment of folks who are political prisoners versus those who are not, either by the system itself or by folks on the outside, or both?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly and just say that it's important that, people who may have not gone to prison based on their political actions or beliefs can quickly become political prisoners inside. We know that by way of George Jackson, by way of so many other people. And so it's important to know that any kind of organizing that you do will result in the state coming down on you in some way, shape, or form. Jamal Joseph said in one of his books, who's a former political prisoner, is that when initially political prisoners when folks are sent to prison as political prisoners, they do harder time because the objective is to make an example out of them. The fact that they have been incarcerated is an attempt to criminalize our movement. And so to make sure that the quote unquote state, punishes them in a way that will break them. And so that is real. But then again, people who have a different set of circumstances that land them in prison, who begin to function in the capacity of changing the material reality of themselves and other folks behind the walls, they begin to feel that same brunt. So it's important to know that it's not just political prisoners, but the work that you do that attempts to, combat what's happening will result in some level of response from the state.
I echo what Lumumba was saying, and I want to add, though, one of the things that is, I guess, really, really stands out about the difference in treatment for political prisoners is from the moment that they were incarcerated, they were sent as far away as possible from their family members. That was one of the things that we saw that was a distinct difference in the 70s and the 80s, which is just the ability to move people. So using Sundiata Acoli as an example, his conviction came out of New Jersey. So he was, for a while, incarcerated in New Jersey, but as soon as possible, New Jersey signed an interstate compact with the feds, and then he went into the federal system, still serving his New Jersey time, and then he could be moved all over the country. As a result of that, and only recently, like within the past 6 weeks, is he now incarcerated in New Jersey again for the first time, relatively close to his family. So that's one of the things that's different. Another thing that is different is right after 9/11, various political prisoners were literally held incommunicado, and there was no legal format or justification or I guess use just the word justification that allowed for that. But literally the U.S. Attorney General sent the word across the Bureau of Prisons that a variety of political prisoners, including Marilyn Buck, Sundiata Acoli, Richard Williams, and some others, were held with no access to lawyers, no access to their family, no access to the media, no access to friends, by letter, visits, or phone calls. And that went on for months and months and months. So it's just important to know that history as lawyers, because sometimes the law just doesn't give us enough traction to bring about the kind of change. And that's why it's really important for lawyers to work in tandem with activists, because the lines get blurry sometimes.
Amen to that. Beautiful. The last question I have before we do a quick opening is when we've been talking a lot, and shout out to Derica and other folks in our network, about abolition and the ways that lawyers can be dismantling systems even as we engage them. And so I think although folks are across the spectrum around where they fall on abolition, organization, we believe deeply in kind of building an abolitionist future, in which we are supporting the building of institutions of advocacy work that is starting to dismantle and diminish the importance of jails, cages, prisons, cops, all these things. So just interested in your own work, how abolition fits into the advocacy work you're doing, and what are some challenges with an abolitionist frame in the work that you do.
So for me, I'm not an abolitionist in the traditional sense of working to tear down physical jails or prisons. For me, incarceration, it became a tool for me. I was incarcerated long before I entered into a physical incarceration in 2007. So to be able to use my incarceration as a time to tear down some emotional, spiritual, and like mental forms of prison, I can't imagine where I'd be now, you know, in my reentry stage. So for me, I look at abolitionists of why there's this amazing work of being tearing down prisons from the outside. How can I do the work of helping those individuals to tear down prisons that exist inside? Because these prisons, you know, I've recognized like keep us constantly incarcerated, and it keeps us into going back into physical incarceration. So that's the approach that I use, is how to empower individuals from the inside out to, you know, not just come out of prison, but to come out of incarceration in a way that we can stand in front of incarceration in our communities, and stand in any form of incarceration that just, you know, try to keep us from reaching our highest potential as people.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, for us, most of our all of our policy work really, the either short-term or long-term goals are around decarceration. So like primarily like what we're trying to do is to fight for policies that actually bring people home from prison. But then we also work on policies like Proposition 57, which give people an incentive to complete educational rehabilitative programs, self-help groups, peer-led groups. Now you can get time off of your sentence for forming your own group and leading your own peers when you're inside, to work on, you know, as Jody said, like breaking down some of your own emotional walls. So that was a monumental piece of legislation that not only brings people home from prison, but also like offers them the tools to be able to stay in their communities. And then we also, in our organizing work, like always, like make sure that what we are clearly articulating is that this is part of the long-term strategy to actually like change the system as we know it, to end the system as we know it, to create a public safety system that exists outside of physical cages, to create a public safety system in which we are investing in communities and families and preventative measures, alternatives to incarceration, restorative justice, making it clear in everything that we do that this is what our ultimate goals are. So even if policies that we are fighting for in the interim are, you know, within the system, within the structure, we are making sure that the policies that we fight for are not ones that will have unintended consequences, are not ones that could ultimately lead to more incarceration or further entrench incarceration of certain groups of people for the benefit of the others. So yeah, you know, just like being really strategic in the policy work, but also in like the way that we are talking about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, if I can just add really quickly. So, you know, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, of course, is abolitionist, but the Legal Defense Fund where I work is explicitly not. But I think that's actually fertile ground to begin to have the conversation about what that actually looks like, because I think for the most part, that's the big lion's share of the work, to really begin to transform the thinking, the framing of our civil rights institutions so that they can understand what that actually means and begin to imagine, you know, other alternatives, you know, beyond just incarceration, but alternatives to, you know, what a world could look like. As we imagine, you know, what crime, what criminalization looks like. And so I think that for many of us who don't have those kinds of spaces where we are explicitly abolitionists and we can work free in exploring what that looks like, we have a larger responsibility to begin to transform the culture and the approach and framing of the institutions that are not, and that in some cases may actually be opposed to that.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in. This reminds me of years ago when I would hear the term protracted struggle and I would start to cringe because it just seemed like protracted struggle meant it was never going to happen. And but what I've come to understand is it's a process. If we're actually going to get to an abolition reality, then we have to change the narrative over time. And I think that's part of what Lumumba was talking to and with Taina, that one, it gives us the opportunity to build in a human rights narrative in all of the work that we're doing, and that by uplifting the reality of the horror of the conditions and the trauma and the terror that our people are exposed to on a daily basis, we can start to push back against the punishment paradigm that is central to the way this country operates, and to expose people to the fact that in other parts of the world, this punishment paradigm is not so dominant, and that there are other ways, there are human rights ways to address human aberrant behavior that does not cause harm, but that helps to uplift and support people and families and communities. But in order to get to that abolitionist point, we have to do this, literally what I call the entry work, which is training how people think and taking the economic benefit out of putting people in cages as being something that is accepted as the norm as to how this society should operate. We really hold the power to do that, not only in our speech, how we show up using our craft, but also we have the ability, because we're lawyers, to use our writing through op-eds, letters to the editor, other articles, because we're viewed as having an elevated lens, whether that's true or not. We're viewed as having that, and we need to maximize and exploit that access, and also use our position to get a seat at the table anytime decisions are being made. Because what we know is our incarcerated and formerly incarcerated brothers and sisters may not always get that seat at the table, so we have to get to the table so we can fight for them to have a seat at the table. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sophia. That was powerful. So I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any questions they want to put in the chat box, please put them in now. We're almost out of time. So I want to just give all the panelists who have been incredible and just so incredibly powerful and brilliant a chance to have any kind of last imparting words or questions or like requests from the folks on this call or beyond. So inviting you all to do that. And again, if there are any last questions, folks can put it in the chat box. Do y'all have, as panelists, anything you want to say or any requests, any kind of closing words you want to offer?
Help, we need you.
Yes, I like it. Help and no more lazy lawyers.
I think my parting words would be a quote from Hayward Burns, who was brilliant, who said, always remember that sometimes the law is an asset and sometimes it gets in the way.
Yep. Jody or Amani or Taina?
Mine would be just stay on the lookout for prisoners that are suffering from retaliation in large scales. And if you see someone close to your region, you can reach out to them and write them a letter. I'm sure they'd be super glad to get it.
Yep, and I'll make sure, oh, go ahead.
That would alert also authorities, like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
They're gonna
That's dope. And I'll also be in touch with you around if there are things happening, we can share that with our network and the folks on this call. So if there's a way for us to update them, we can definitely do that.
I'll send updates for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you. Jody or Taina?
And right now, I'm currently doing a lot of outreach and networking with prisons throughout the United States, as well as jailhouse lawyers, individuals, law clerks, law librarians. So if it is a law school, a lawyer, a community organization, for me, after incarceration, although I couldn't immediately get into law school, I was able to use my skills in organizations like the National Council for Incarceration for Incarcerated Women and Girls, the Florida Restoration Rights Coalition, where I was able to help collect over 1 million petitions. And we do have our initiative on the ballot, which will be voted on in November, to get our votes, our right to vote restored here inside of Florida, and now leading participatory defense here inside of my community. So, you know, empowering individuals to be able to step up to what has already been kind of designed inside of us, and the inside, I think, is important. So any way that I could be a bridge between you and a prison, a law school, provide you with any type of support or access to any institution within your area, please reach out. My email is just jodypolk@gmail.com. I'd be happy to do the legwork to get you where you could do some good for some individuals who are incarcerated and doing some amazing work.
Yeah, and I think that I would just echo a lot of that. If folks are in California or can help to support our members inside, like, please reach out. My email is Taina, Taina, @initiatejustice.org. And just as a general practice for lawyers, you know, I would just encourage folks to, like, listen to people who are inside. You know, folks who are inside are, like, going through a lot, man. Folks be, like, super traumatized, like, just trying to get out of there, just trying to have somebody to hear them. And, you know, if you're with a legal practice that maybe gets a lot of letters from folks inside all of the time, and maybe you think, you know, you read somebody's letter and you're like, oh, I can't help them, like, just try and figure out what you can do to be a resource to that person, because, you know, a lot of these folks inside, like, they don't have family, they don't have people who can really, like, go down for them like that. So just, you know, do your best to, like, utilize your experience, your power, and your privilege to be a bridge for someone on the inside.
Yes, so we're just gonna end it with that. So thank you all so much for that, and just for the brilliance and insight and wisdom and the amazing work each of y'all are doing. And we will be posting some resources from our panelists on the website, as well as this recording. So we hope you check it out. And again, if you have any questions, let us know at info@law4black lives. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking your evenings, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank y'all.